Hi, and welcome to Dear Art Producer. I am your host, Heather Elder, and today is March 25th, 2022, and we are joined by freelance producer Raquel Duarte. Raquel applies her working motto of making content that we are proud of to every aspect of her 20-plus year career. From publishing to assisting to repping and now executive producing, she has always embraced the challenge of an ever-evolving advertising industry and has never lost sight of the core feeling of why she's jumped into this business to begin with. With a relentless drive to push herself, the technology and the creative capabilities of the team she works with, Raquel has been honored to guide the creation of campaigns for global brands such as Timberland, AT&T, Remy Martin, Crate & Barrel, and Alaska Airlines, to name a few. As a New Yorker and a School of Visual Arts alum, Raquel brings the energy and resourcefulness expected of the place she calls home. Welcome, Raquel. I am so happy to have you as a guest. Hello.
Hi, Heather. Thank you so much for having me on here. I am honored to be part of this, and I can't thank you enough for having this initiative and opening this platform to freelancers and other art producers like myself. It's just really sweet and incredible and thoughtful of you. So thank you for having me today.
Oh my gosh, of course. I just, a long time ago, I think it was at a La Book event, I remember being approached by so many art producers that I had known had been in permanent roles that had gone freelance. And I just thought, wow, they have such interesting insights because they've been at so many different agencies and there was no way to kind of keep track of all of them. And also for them to kind of have a platform for themselves, which was why we started freelanceartproducer.com. But it's been really awesome to have the podcast to be able to showcase all of your talents and all of your experiences as well. So I'm so glad you said yes today.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, not all art producers take the same path to their job. And I would love to know a little bit more about your school background and kind of where you started. You mentioned earlier to me that you worked at Glamour. And I think that's kind of interesting. I had a friend that worked there back in the day. So I'd love to kind of hear your points of view on that and how all of your experiences kind of inform you being an executive producer today.
Sure. So I kind of have a very unique story of how my career started because I was still very, very young and in high school doing photography classes and breathing, everything photography related. And I thought that was my passion. And in order to graduate, we had to do a big mentorship and go in front of a panel within the school, do a writing exercise and all of this stuff in order to graduate. So it was a big deal. And I had at that time sent out a whole bunch of letters because emails was not a thing yet. And I'm kind of aging myself right now. But I sent out letters to all these magazines thinking I want to work for a magazine. How interesting would that be? And Glamour actually wrote back and said, yeah, sure. A free internship, come on board. So I jumped and I worked for them for, I think 3 months or so. Assisting to the photo editor and doing, some tasks where at the time I was like, ooh, how do I even do this? Like a floating shelf, like a bathroom floating shelf. How do I produce that? How do I put this together for a photo shoot? So it was really the spark for the industry that I got excited about. And then from there, I got into School of Visual Arts. So I went to school for photography. I started managing a photographer's studio and assisting on sets. And right away, I understood that I loved photography, but that I was better at the planning of it. So things shifted a little bit for me. And by the time I graduated, I got a job as an artist agent. So I pursued that for a few years. I was really happy producing and representing artists and a roster of artists and, really learning the different styles and the work. And eventually I pivoted to the agency side of things. And it was really an agency that knowing that I had this photography background, they really gave me the opportunity, the chance, and invested in me by putting me in print production, which I knew nothing about. But they said, given your background and with the right mentor, we'll teach you the ropes and we think you're going to excel at it. So that's when I learned, A, I went to the agency side, and then B, really learned like different printing types, vinyls, printing on paper, working, retouching in post, pulling proofs, going on press checks. So working with the studio to build mechanicals. So it was a very different skill set that I didn't even know it was possible in our industry. And I learned the ropes there. And I did that for a long time. And then the recession hit in 2008. And back then is when agencies were very separated in their department. So you had your traditional art buyers that were shoot planners. You had the post team who would oversee editing and retouching. You'd have the studio and the print producer who was working on CMYK files and mechanicals and pulling proofs and going to press. So very different departments. And when the recession happened, a lot of people were unfortunately let go. And as they started coming back and things got better, the industry really changed, and all those different departments started migrating to like becoming one or becoming less separated. And because they knew I had the art buying and the photography experience or knowledge, they said, "Can you come back and do both?" So I started, I was able to produce a job all the way from the creative development stages to the execution to the post, all the way through making those deliverables out to the world and to go live. So I feel like it was a very unique experience, and the timing that everything happened that early in my career, that was really helpful for me in making my skill set very different than most producers that were out there at the time, or even still today, where I have this very big knowledge of the whole process and all the details that go into each category of that process, versus just being really good at like one portion. And I think today too, we've all had to evolve, and we all know so much more than, we knew when we all started our career. Sure. With technology and everything changing, we're most producers these days know how to produce video and digital and broadcast, not just shoot production, but like beyond what our traditional like still photography used to be. And so that's kind of the roundabout or the explanation of how I got to where I am today. Yeah. And I love it. And this is, really like why we're now called content or integrated producers, because of, all of these different departments merging and becoming one, and us having like this much knowledge and experience. And so that's kind of where I've ended up today. Being an executive producer is really just having all that like experience and knowledge under my belt.
Well, I mean, I hear you explain all of that, and I'm reminded of my own path, where I too started really young, knowing exactly what I was interested in, and went from an ad agency to a photo studio to being a rep, and grew up in a time like yourself where we experienced so many different parts of the industry, right? Everything from putting together actual print transparency portfolios, probably, to printed portfolios, to websites, to, email, to all of those different, technologies and how they have influenced us, and the recession and the combining of roles. I look back on, as I'm sure you do, as you were explaining, on the career path that I had, and I realize where I sit now, I can draw from so many different types of experiences that are helping inform the future, and help me really be able to advise my clients about, what happened and where we're going. I'm looking to the new generation, of course, to also bring us further into the future. But I think in order to be successful, or you could, the most successful, it helps to really pull from those other experiences in the past. And it sounds like you and I have very similar experiences. And I'm so grateful for all of that.
Yeah, it does. It does. And me too. I'm very grateful. And I'm also really excited about what does our future, mean, and what that's going to look like, because we never imagined that we could be doing the things we are today. So
No,
that can
so
be
true.
like 10 years from now, and hopefully it's not another recession or a pandemic that changes, the way we do things. But, at the same time, we're ever evolving. And I get excited just knowing about we don't know it all and we don't have all the knowledge. We know what we know based on experience and how far we've come. But at the same time, it's really exciting to not know what's in the future and what those cards hold for us.
I was doing a little research the other day on kind of the metaverse and what would a metaverse art gallery look like and what would a presentation room look like just looking for different ways to present work. That would be a little bit more interesting because it's hard right now to find a really, effective way to present work, which we can get into a little bit later. But yeah, I'm with you. I'm really excited for what the future is bringing and how we can add to it. Well, tell me a little bit about what you're known for on your team.
Let's see. I think energy for sure. My approach to how I view things and how I handle them. Creative collaboration. I really like to be part of the brainstorm and be the silent person in the background. And then if I have anything that's going to help or emphasize the project, then I'll speak up and be part of that creative conversation. People know I'm very relentless, always going, but in a good way. I feel like that has a negative connotation to it, but in a good way. And I've been called sweetly persistent, which I think is a good way to put it.
Like the velvet hammer.
Right. Sweetly persistent. And I'm super organized. And I think the type A personality definitely helps, when it comes to the way I work and how, and what people are known, what they know me for is being super meticulous and organized. So
how do you use all of that to kind of enhance your role as an art producer, right? Maybe explain a little bit about what you do as an executive art producer right now, and how all of those things help you.
So it really depends on the project I'm working on, but always, there's always a deliverables list at the end of the day. And I think that's the biggest thing, how my brain works. And I always have to put it in some sort of form, grid or visual representation. And I always start at the end of the project and then work our way to the beginning and to where we need to be to launch the production. So what does that delivery looks like? And putting that in a grid that anyone that has never touched the project could look at and fully understand it just from that one visual. So I think that's where my approach and my organizational skills come really in handy, is looking at it that way, which is, it's kind of strange, right? Why look at the end of the project versus the beginning? But it's how my brain works. And I think that's been very helpful, even when we're putting SOWs together and things like that, or even budget breakdowns, knowing that end goal and how that all breaks down. A lot of the times I'm finding that the agency didn't even realize, or the client didn't realize, how big of an ask the project was until that visual is put together and shared. And then they go, oh, right. Okay.
Oh, no, that is so key, having the deliverables figured out. I can tell when an agency requests something of us when they haven't done that exercise, because I'm the one who's saying, do you realize that you're asking for this? And they're like, oh, wow, that's not a one-day shoot like I thought it would be. Especially given how integrated the productions are with motion and all the other types of deliverables that people might want. Being able to, have that clearly defined from the beginning and work backwards for that, from that, is very important. I agree with you.
Cool.
Okay, so what is the most challenging aspect of your job?
So I think the production is, every job is unique, but production at the end of the day, it's almost the same no matter where I go. The steps that we take to get there, the planning of it. But as a freelancer, I find the most challenging is the new team. I have to constantly relearn who I'm working, or not relearn, but learn who I'm working with, because the teams are always changing.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and the different taste buds, what ticks someone versus how to please someone. All those things are different. So the production will be, every project is going to be challenging and every project is going to be different. But the teams, that's the guaranteed part. They'll be different no matter where I go. And the ways of doing things at that agency or for that brand, the process at each place, the programs. So I'm constantly having to learn or adapt to the differences of going from one job to another, from company to company. So sometimes there's a bit of like a learning curve, unless it's a client that I've worked with before and I know exactly what I'm getting myself with. And I don't mind that. And, it's the life of a freelance producer, is you're just constantly having to adapt to how it's done there versus how it's done somewhere else. And even simple things like generating a PO, that could be 5 different ways, depending on where you're working at that moment. And today, lately, more recently, the biggest challenge I would think is the long hours. But that's just because of with the quarantine and having everyone work from home. I've had to adapt in the sense that I've always been freelancing, and I've always worked from home while the rest of the industry was 9 to 5 or 8 to 10, 8 to 6, whatever those hours were. People were clocking into the office, clocking out, and having that commute time that to them, the end of the day would end here.
Yeah.
And I was used to that, working from home. Like, I know my day is going to start here and end there, because that's what the rest of the industry is doing. With this pandemic, all the people who were full-timers and not used to that like regular schedule went home, and it became, and this is probably the demand of the industry too, where that cutoff time or that fine line of having an 8 to 10 hour working day has just expanded to you're always working, you're always on, you're always checking your emails. So the days have become much, much longer. And I think that's been challenging.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's a challenge that we have right now. I don't think it's going to be like that forever. I think that is just one of those things that I'm finding challenging today, is that the balance has become much longer and much more challenging than it was if you asked me this question, 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, no, I agree. I just read an article, or I just saw an article that I would like to read. And the title of it was something like, we need to make our the out of office message more, basically like, it's okay to have an out of office message, and it's like paid attention to,
right.
Don't text me when you get an out of office message. I shouldn't have to feel like I can say, I will check messages infrequently, but I will be checking. Like, if you're out of the office, it should be okay.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that has been a big thing for a lot of people to have to manage, for sure.
Right.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about production. What are your clients asking for you right now? Is anybody hesitant to produce? Is there anything holding people back? Or do you feel like it's just full steam ahead?
I'm finding that it's full steam ahead and very busy. I think clients have gotten to the groove of things. The projects, the budgets, the quarterly budgets are being spent again. Everyone's shooting. I'm seeing more and more that they're starting to shoot out of town and international. So, or at least if they're not doing it, it's being considered again. And what I am finding is that a lot of times, because we mastered now shooting remotely, that a lot of clients don't want to be on set anymore, which is mind-boggling to me, because that's part of the project, planning for months and then producing and shooting it, is being on set, and that energy of collaboration is so exciting, and things like finally it's coming to life and fruition. But I'm seeing that more and more because we did so good in adapting so quickly to the change of pace and industry, that they don't feel like they need to be there, and that this, even if the creative team or the production team is on site, that they can just log in and be remote. And it is working. I just miss a little bit of having, that the group together and focusing on the project when it is coming to life.
Do you think that's because they're trying to save money, or their time has gotten filled with other stuff, so they're too busy and they, it's not, or maybe a combination?
No, I don't think it's about money, because what's, having 3 more people on set versus less. I think it's really everyone's very busy, and it's a preference because it's available and it works now.
Right.
So I think it's just one of those things that the industry has changed, and and clients are shooting again. And now they have the option to be there or not be there. And it's, either way works. But yeah, I think, they're definitely back on, and there's a lot of shooting happening again, thankfully.
Yeah, we are finding the same thing on our end. We're still bidding for remote shoots, even when people are on set, because there's some people who want to, log on, and other people who can attend. So I'm enjoying the remote shoots because I get to pop in every once in a while and say hi, where I never, ever would have been able to do that on certain shoots. So that's kind of nice. But I think that's something that doesn't look like it's going away anytime soon.
Yeah. So there's a good positive way to look at it.
Absolutely.
We have you on shoots now.
So do you think it's harder or easier now to get an estimate approved? And is COVID playing any part into that? Like, what does COVID look like for you guys now on production? And what kind of predictions do you have for productions through the end of the year? Is the economy playing into any of that?
Yeah, so it's such strange times. I do think clients and brands, agencies, as everyone is being extremely careful. You can't be too careful these days. And no agency or no brand wants to be known for the bad PR that could come with being responsible for an outbreak or this or that. So I think that it is not, the shoots are happening. I don't think getting an estimate approved is being hard. I do think that circumstances have made it so that there's new line items on an estimate. And unfortunately, having to have COVID compliance and protocols, which takes away from the production budget, be now a line item on that estimate, is a thing, something we didn't have before, but now is a mandate, and for a good one, because we need to ensure that everyone's safety and everyone's healthy comes as a priority. So I'm seeing that estimates are getting signed. Maybe it takes a little bit longer than usual, just because everyone's contemplating the precautions necessary to implement a shoot. But once all of that is being reassured and there's a peace of mind, definitely I'm seeing estimates and getting approved and shoots moving forward.
Yeah, I find, obviously on our end too, COVID is definitely still a thing, something that needs to be estimated for and paid attention to. And everyone seems to be still taking it really seriously, which is great. I think where things have changed is that, at the very beginning of the year, I think people were a little bit scared just given the new variant and what was happening. So there was some extra precautions that were put into place and some, extra conversations, where I think it's also causing a little bit of a backlog not a backlog, but, a little bit of a time suck is kind of in the, once a job is approved, the actual negotiating of the terms and conditions around that.
Yes.
That has really become more complicated because of COVID. And what we've been learning on our end, and you can tell me if you do this too, is that we really need to be starting to add more time from when a job has been approved until we actually have a signed, negotiated, completed PO. Whereas before it would just maybe take a day or two to kind of make that happen. And now between legal and addendums and, lots of different people chiming in, it's sometimes taking upwards of a week to get that done. And that really is eating into production time and getting advances and kickoffs. And so we're trying to be a loud voice around making sure that that's put into our production schedules ahead of time, or at least the questions are asked. How long does it take on your end? It takes me about 3 days. How long does it take you? So thought that is kind of an interesting thing that's rising to the surface right now.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I'm seeing the same thing where we're still using, and I'm to a fault, still using a schedule that would get us from approved artists to shoot planning. And it's never taking that amount of time. It's always taking longer.
Yeah.
And then it affects the shoot date and affects post-production, because usually the hard deadlines are what they are. And it's just everything gets crunched in the middle.
Yeah.
And it's, interesting that the only things that we used to have to plan for is, we're shooting outside, we need a weather contingency day. Right? Now it's changed to, we need backup to the models, a backup to the backup of the system. We need backups for everybody because, those key players, if they test negative or if they're sick, they're not allowed on set. We need a backup. And that's what's taking all that time too. In the upfront of getting things signed is, especially with the models, I had that happen recently. We needed 3 models and I had to put all these backup models on hold. And if you put someone on hold, you have to pay them. So that delayed the whole signing of that estimate to start because of all these things that fortunately we didn't have to fall into our backup plan or our emergency plan, and everything ran super smoothly. But it did eat 2 weeks of my production, pre-production time. So you're absolutely correct.
Yeah, it's a fascinating process. I've really been digging into it and learning so much because, I think years ago, photographers would get a PO and they'd get the terms and conditions, and a lot of them didn't read them. There wasn't a lot of liability they probably held a lot of the liability at the time, but they just didn't think about it. Things didn't usually go wrong. There weren't a lot that could happen that they were thinking too much about, and they would sign it and they would probably cross off the work for hire. There'd be things that they would cross off, and it would go very quickly. And now there's so much between talent suing photographers and brands, and images being used out of license, and location and warranties and COVID and who pays who if somebody gets sick on set. There's so much. Everyone's paying attention on both sides, the brands, the agencies, and the photographers. So much so that we have a legal team on retainer now that we hadn't had before, not to make the process more difficult, but to make it smoother. Right. Because without that, I wouldn't be able to answer I'm not a lawyer. I wouldn't be able to answer those questions that are coming across my desk from a large agency's legal team. So it's been really helpful, but what we're learning is adding that time into the schedule has been really, really important.
Yeah, I work very closely with business affairs on all those points you just made because it's gotten so extensive on the legalities of things. You're absolutely correct.
Yeah, it's gotten complicated. So you and I can add legal assistant to our resume, I think.
Legal messenger.
Legal messenger. That's perfect. That's
copy and paste, because half of the time I don't understand what they're saying.
Exactly right. That's so true. Well, let's talk a little bit about choosing the artist. What is your option or your process like for sharing options with your team? How do you find the artist? How many do you usually share with the team in the first round? Do they come to you and ask you to see people, or what does that look like on your end?
Sure. So finding the artist is usually through the agent roster that I'm familiar with or I've worked with before. If they're not represented, it's because that photographer or artist or director is on my radar. And that goes for illustrators and animators, things like that, of that nature too. I try to stay really active and relevant with who's out there. I do a lot of the book connections and photo works and joint panels and, am part of critiques and things like that whenever I can. And, a lot of times they reach out to me directly and stay in touch that way. So that's usually my way of finding the artist. Whether they're represented or independent. And then I take a project, really absorb the information and the creative direction, and I'll pull a whole bunch of links, let's say 10 to 20 links of who I think would be appropriate for the job. And then I'll present my creative team with those links, say, comb through it, give me feedback. Because at that point, I'm still really pulling from their brains what they want to do and what they envision. And by having them comb couple different links, even if they're very different from each other, gives me a sense of direction of where their head is at. So then I could always either zero in on, other work that's like closer to their feedback, or emphasize like who from that original link list would be the appropriate ones for their like vision. Once I have that, which has narrowed down the choices, the sensibility, the style, I can start getting on the phone and getting those conversations with the artists or their agents directly and start talking about shoot dates, budgets, so that I can gauge the availability and the interest. And then I go back to my team and say, hey, out of your 5, for example, like these 3 have greenlit, they're super interested and available, and we can put them in front of clients. So that's usually how I like navigate the creative search and present to a team.
Now, I'm guessing pretty much after that, once you narrow it all down, you are going to obviously have your creative call. And we all know how important the creative call is. What advice do you have for the people who are listening about what they can do on the creative call? What could help them? What could hurt them? What does a successful creative call look like to you?
Sure. I think that introduction of who they are that makes them personal and unique from someone else is super important. First and foremost. And then second is really understanding the project and having a conversation. And it's not like presenting, it's more of an open conversation about the project and what they understand of the project, and having that come both ways from the creative and the photographer as a conversation about the project. Because that's when really you get a sense of being the right fit, and knowing where that project can go. And a lot of times out of those dialogues, there's a bit of a brainstorm that happens very organically that usually helps sell through who we should be working with.
Yeah, I agree with that. I find that what makes a call successful from our point of view, obviously we need you to be a tour guide for us of your project, right? We have read the specs, we've seen the deck. Sometimes they show up right before the call, so that makes it a little bit hard. But, assuming we have enough time, we've digested it all, and, getting you guys to kind of walk us through it is really important. But I think what separates out the good calls from the really amazing calls are the ones where agencies can also share with us what it is that they like about a photographer's work, what they've seen that the photographer can kind of draft off of and talk a little bit about, because they have a range of work, and knowing what it is that you've gravitated to would really helps them kind of shape their vision, because they're hearing from you for the first time on that creative call, and they haven't probably formulated their vision totally yet. It's almost like we need 2 creative calls. We need to hear from you, and then we need a minute to go back and think, and then kind of come back with another creative call, which I know is not possible. But just knowing what kind of images or which of the images or motion pieces kind of spoke to you always makes it a better call, I think, on our end.
I totally agree. Couldn't agree more. It's like almost like a pulse check of, from a photographer could have so much work, and a lot of times even work that's not on their website, right? That will pull just for the project. What are the creatives gravitating towards? And let's talk about those pieces and why. I think that's super important.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what about the estimating process? Do your clients give you budgets, and do you share those with your team and the photographers you're bidding, or do you guys kind of feel like you just want to know what it costs and then you go to your client at that point?
Most of the time, yes, I do get the budgets, and I take those budgets and I divide them up for the entire project. So again, like I said earlier, I start at the end. So what is the deliverables list, and what goes into that? Are we talking about stills, GIFs, video, motion, editing? What are we talking about? And I start breaking that budget down and end up with how much do I have for the shoot? And by now I know what a shoot should cost based against the creative that we're trying to execute. So a lot of times I'll go back to my breakdowns and change them so that I can allow for the appropriate budget needed for the shoot. And then I will go to the agent or the photographer's producer and I say, this is how much I have. Can you make it work with that? Or I feel confident in how I've, with this amount because of X, Y, and Z. And because I come from that side of, having been an artist agent and seeing the costs being received in that way, like I think it's a collaboration of allocating those funds. And also like with, again, going, if the shoot has a model and we know the level of model or caliber that we need, that is pretty like industry standard. So I can put that towards that budget and say, and figure out how much I have. And then it becomes like a partnership of figuring out, okay, can we put these numbers here and there? What's the level of wardrobe stylist? What's, how much set production do we need?
Yeah, you want the best possible job for the amount of money you have.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And if I'm not given a budget to start the project with, I usually have a pretty good idea of what that ballpark should be, or at least a range and a fair range. So I'll go to the account team. I'll advise them, hey, we should be between this and that. Go to the client and get a pulse check, because I don't want to like start all these conversations and be wasting people's times, including our time, and ballparking this and that, and then the client saying it's too high. So
Thank you.
Of course, I mean, we got to be fair and kind to each other. So we know how this is a pretty industry standard cost. The things that we have negotiating power is in usage fees and other amounts that are usually, based on fairness versus like a day rate that someone gets paid for in our industry. So it's almost like a plug and play. And obviously, there's always exceptions and you can call in favors. But before we get to all of those, which is what should be always in your back pocket, not something you have in the forefront, I like to get that pulse check. And I like to say, this is the range. Let's see how the client or, what if their budget can support that. Because if it can't, then maybe we have a creative challenge that I have to solve through. And I don't like being the producer that goes to a creative team and say, you can't have this. I will go to them and say, let's rethink how we approach in creating that. And we'll brainstorm on that so that it meets the budget, because there's always some sort of compromise on somewhere. And obviously you don't want to compromise on the creative. You always want the integrity of the production to fulfill all of that need. But there's somewhere where you can navigate those funds, and usually being honest and transparent with what you have is going to make the job a lot more efficient for your team, my team, and for client expectations.
I couldn't agree more. I almost want you to like repeat all of that again and bold it and like big exclamation points. It was all so right on exactly what we experience as well, and what we need to experience more of. A lot of people don't do what you're doing, and it just makes the process that much harder. You mentioned something earlier about usage. When does usage come up in the conversation for you?
Usually it's pretty early. However, it's not always well defined or defined to the extension of what we think we'll need. So I always look at the usage very closely because I like to approach a project with a higher or a larger usage than a very limited. I don't like when we're pinpointing like, oh, it's digital. What does digital mean? Is it website? Is it social? Is it, what is a digital to you? Is it digital billboard? So I like to get really in the nitty gritty. But at the same time, when I go back, I say, let's just get a 1 year unlimited versus a 1 year for print POS. I don't like to list all the little things, because most often after the job has been negotiated and signed, we'll come back and learn there's a new usage that was not on a media buy in the first place. And now we have to renegotiate everything. So, and it's a lose-lose situation in a way, because then the client has to find additional funds to support it. We have to take the time to go back and renegotiate it. So for me, I like to understand where exactly the client's needs. And again, it goes back to that deliverables list. And then I would prefer to always go with unlimited for a determined amount of time. So 1 year, 2 years. Clients always love buyouts, and I'd love to give them buyouts and in perpetuity. But, unfortunately, that's not always the case. But looking again at their media buy, if we can open it to 3 years or 5 years, then let's negotiate that versus having to pick the exact immediate needs, not thinking about the future.
Yeah, we see a lot of that also, for sure. How about production markup? Are you starting to see that more on bids? I know that the AMA is advocating for it. It's happening a lot in our group and in other groups where, there's way more legal issues and there's more prep and, things, COVID, and just photographers and clients, are beginning to pass more and more of the liability and especially the cash flow. We're not getting 100% of our advances. And so I think, the production markup is becoming more of a standard. Is that something that you're seeing on your jobs?
I am. And I'm seeing that in the bigger jobs, motion jobs. I'm starting to see a little bit with shoots. I feel like it's always been there with still shoots, but now it's versus before was maybe baked in. Now it's, a production markup line item on the estimate.
Yeah, I think people are trying to be really transparent about it.
Right. And so I am seeing a lot of those. I'm seeing legal fees. We were talking about that before. I'm seeing the compliance, COVID compliance lines being separated out too, because that's a new thing. And I always put those as the line items divided also in the client estimate so they can see what we're seeing versus a bulk, because, that helps them see that this is taking away from the production versus, having a different set built or more wardrobe or whatever that is. It's line items of spending that you're not gaining on the production. It's all things that go into something else. And I've been adding to lately like a currency conversion too on our estimates, especially when working with international partners, because again, that's all like funds that you're not gaining in deliverables or in assets. It's just lines that you have to be spending towards making sure that these things are getting done, or, there's the attorneys behind it so that in the long run, you don't end up with an issue that will cost a lot more. So I've been showing anytime I get an estimate with those lines, I will make sure the client sees them as separated out from the production budget as well.
Are you seeing any more firm bids than you used to, or are you?
It depends on the project, but not necessarily.
And how about treatments? Are your need for treatments increasing or decreasing?
So they're definitely increasing. Great question. I used to see treatments used for motion only. I'm now seeing, and photographer links used to be sufficient. Or just calling in, hey, can you put together just a one pager with more work that's not on their site but speaks to our project? That kind of has evolved. And I think, again, because of the way the last 2 years have unveiled that a lot less of those conversations on the phone with the photographers are happening. And those treatments now are being requested even for still shoots, because that will speak the words of the photographer if a call is not happening. So I'm seeing that being asked constantly. And I know that treatments are such a time suck that I often want to make sure the photographer knows I'm in it with them and they're not alone in creating those. So just a couple weeks ago, I was on a project, and because I have such a clear idea of what the creatives need and the client expectations, that I guided this artist on how to build that treatment and what they should be putting on it or what to leave out, because I didn't want it to be overwhelming for them having to put this together, especially for a photographer who hasn't had to do it very often. It could be overwhelming to do
For
that.
sure.
In like a 24, 48 hour turnaround, So I don't mind being in the trenches with them and helping, or even sometimes like I'll guide them or give them some sort of structure, and then they'll run it past me, make a few tweaks, and then I'll present it to the creatives, because I
love that. I love that because it is such a time suck, and some photographers spend way more time than they need to on them, just because they get dug in, and it's their vision, and they're super excited about it, and in their mind they've already produced the job by the time the treatment is over. Having some direction from the agency about what is important would really be great. I have always thought, God, it would be awesome if there was just like a template,
Yes.
that everybody followed the same thing, and it looked this. I mean, it didn't look the same, but it like you answered the same questions. You included like all the same sections, so everybody's kind of apples to apples. Although I know that is not what we all are looking for, because you want the your own personality to shine through and your own vision to come out, and your
want them to
aesthetic.
stand out.
Yeah.
Well, I think you touch on
it's
a really
lot.
good point. I think the template ties. So that's actually a really good idea, because maybe it obviously will never get the industry standard to be templatized across the board, but perhaps is that artist comes up with a templatized way that speaks their voice, their style, their tone, their color, their energy, whatever it is that makes them special and unique from everyone else. And then that's already created if they have a studio that they own or always rent at, or a collaboration with so-and-so, like have all those slides already pre-built.
Yeah, no, we do for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
But it's just, I think it's still at least
a daunting task.
It's still a daunting task. Yeah. And I just want to commend you for offering to help people, especially if they're new to the process, because it can be so daunting to, just have a little bit of guidance there, because you can really underdo a treatment and you can completely overdo a treatment. So it's nice to know that you're offering some help, and that's great.
Yeah, and you don't want to receive a 25-page deck, consolidate that. Like, don't overthink it, get straight to the point, and sometimes less is more.
Yeah, that is so true. Of course, you do the less is more, and then you hear the feedback. Oh, well, this other treatment had a lot more detail. So these poor photographers just, each job and each client and each creative is just all so different. So
different.
Yeah.
Agency to agency, creative to creative. And at the end of the day, you cannot please everyone.
No. And that's what I was just going to say. And you just have to really, do what's right for yourself.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Well, before we kind of wrap up, I just want to make sure we touch on a little bit about how it's so crazy out there right now. Like, how do photographers and directors connect with you right now? And reps, we're not going into offices to do portfolio shows anymore. How are they connecting with you, and what sort of messages are resonating with you or kind of rise to the top right now?
So it's been pretty quiet lately, to be honest. I think the amount of outreach I used to get pre-pandemic was a lot higher, in every sense of emails, phone calls, mailers, and maybe because artists and agents don't really know where people are these days to mail, promo cards and things like that. It's been quite quiet. I am still on email blasts, and I do like to receive those, and I archive them in a particular way that if I'm trying to find someone or access a type of work, I can go through my emails. I'm not responding, but I'm definitely receiving them and seeing them. So that's been my way of accessing information and updates from photographers, from directors, from illustrators, is seeing those emails come through. Mm-hmm. I do miss the phone calls, not that I want to get inundated with phone calls, but, reaching out and hearing from you, Heather, and saying, hey, Raquel, what have you been up to? Like, did you survive this crazy year? Just a little quick message saying hi, and not always just trying to sell it or trying to say, we have a new artist or this person just did that. Just sometimes just reaching out and saying a little like personal message from something about me or something like that.
Yeah.
Will take 5 minutes, 10 minutes to reply back and check up on you and check up. And then it, goes into the artist and everything else and the work. And so I think yeah, it's been quiet 2 years. I actually can't wait until things get better and goes a little more normalcy.
Yeah. Well,
See each other in
I
person.
appreciate you saying that because I rely so much on our relationships with people that we've all built over the years, and I agree. I think the email thing is the hardest thing that I have, and not the hardest. The email thing is the most immediate tool that I have at my disposal now, and it's so overused, but including by me. Trying to find other ways to stay connected to people. And I wish there was more in-person stuff, but it's starting to happen.
We'll get there.
I do want to apologize. I think my dogs were just let into my office and they both just drank a ton. So if you heard them drinking in the background, that was not me. That was my dogs. So I apologize.
They're a little parched.
Okay. So then, do you ever do portfolio shows online for your teams? Or do you think, I keep saying this, but Zoom fatigue is real. And I reach out so often and people are just like, Heather, I look at your website. We don't have time for that. Nobody's interested.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not doing any portfolio reviews online. The fatigue, the Zoom fatigue, the meets, it's all of that, I think, is oversaturated. I think it's just whenever I see something really cool and interesting, I show it to my creatives who I'm working with at that time and fill them in on something cool and innovative or unique that I've seen that I feel like they should be alerted to or be a part of.
Yeah.
Otherwise, no, I don't think there's been anything that I've been able to do, at least, to do a similar to like a traditional portfolio review or an online portfolio review. I haven't done any of those things. I am starting to gather industry people together. For example, next week, I'm going to do like a little outdoor gathering in my backyard and bring a few of us together just because it's outside. The weather's getting a little warmer, but just to get people back together and introduce producers to creatives to account people. So that's my little way of being able to give back and get people together, because I am missing that creative aspect.
Me too.
People together and showing them work. So that's just, but I can project on a wall. So I'm going to put some artists and some cool things happening out there on the wall. So I think that's just right now is just so difficult to, figure out what to do to make those, portfolio presentations or introducing people to each other to new work, that I'm just trying to do a little small part, but I don't have the answer to that. And I definitely have not been able to show creatives anything in a larger scale, only little things that I come across that I
interesting.
push their way.
Interesting. Well, we are about to wrap up here, and I always ask the same two questions. I love these questions, and I love that anybody listening, if they get to this part, they could repeat these back to you, and you'd know that they listened to the whole thing. What is your favorite thing to do on a Sunday? And if you weren't a producer, what would you be?
Okay, on a Sunday, I've got spring fever. So is it bad if I say drinking mimosas all day?
No, I love that.
Yeah, it just gives me a peace of mind to be pulling weeds and out of the ground and drinking mimosas in the
That
sunshine.
sounds great. I love
Vitamins. So yeah, that's my favorite thing to do lately. And then if I weren't a producer, I used to want to be an elementary school teacher, and I love kids, so that's still very much engraved in me. But I do miss my days of working in the restaurant business, of serving, and just being able to walk away from the job at the end of the day and not take it home with me.
Yeah.
So I miss that a little bit, and I was very good at it. And it's a person job and interacting with people, but at the same time being like, okay, here's your food, enjoy, and now I'm walking away. My job here is done.
Yeah. Were you a waitress?
I was.
Yeah, me too. That was an amazing. I learned so much at that time of my life. I did it for years, and I think it really informs so much of who I am today.
Yep, me too. I always look back on, fond memories of being a waitress. so I would maybe consider doing that again if I wasn't a producer.
Awesome. That's funny. I was in a restaurant the other day and I was just watching the dance between the hostess and the bartender and the waitress and the busboy and,
Yes.
and there was a little part of me that was like, I could do that. I'm sure I'd be exhausted afterwards, but I do have fond memories. Yes, those were good times. I was also, 30 years younger. So anyway, this has been so great. Thank you so much. It's really wonderful to connect with you. Your insights have been fabulous. And, we'll be in touch. I'll let you know when this will air.
My pleasure. I miss you. And thank you again for doing this for all of us.
Absolutely. All right. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.